many, many millions of people are looking at the economic and political system in America and understand that it is not working for them. All right? You tell them to go out and vote, and they go out and vote, and what happens? Over the last 52 years, the average American worker, in inflation accounted for dollars, is earning less than he or she did 52 years ago. And there's been a massive transfer of wealth during that period to the top 1%. Oh, go out and vote. Go out and vote for this candidate or that candidate. Really? Who cares? What does it matter? The rich get richer. I am struggling. Richest country in the world, 60% living paycheck to paycheck.
You just heard Bernie Sanders explain why so many Americans don't even bother to vote. It's because no matter how many times they come out to vote, things never seem to get better. And we've been trapped in this perpetual cycle where Republicans will come in, they'll destabilize and destroy, and then Democrats in the next election will swoop in like heroes to save the day, but they end up not saving the day. In fact, they end up disappointing. So on average, we keep moving backwards because the disappointing incremental changes implemented by Democrats aren't substantial enough to undo the damage caused by Republicans, let alone move us forward. So we've been trapped in this state of decline for decades now. The question is, why? Why are we stuck in this death spiral? And Bernie Sanders provides us with a very simple answer. Follow the money.
When you talk about people losing faith in the American political system, it's justified because you have a corrupt campaign finance system. So you get one vote and you get one vote, and Elon Musk can spend $270 million to help elect Donald Trump to become president, and then his reward is he becomes the most powerful person in government. And it's not just Republicans. You got Democratic billionaires heavily influencing what goes on in the Democratic Party. As I mentioned earlier, I feel very strongly that the United States government should not give another nickel to the Netanyahu extremist government that has killed 50,000 people in Gaza, wounded over 110,000 people. All right, that's my view. You may disagree with me. But you got AIPAC telling any Democrat who stands up to Netanyahu, guess what, we're going to primary you. We're going to spend millions of dollars to defeat you. So does it sound like we're living in a democracy when Musk can intimidate any Republican? You stand up to me, we're going to primary you. We're going to defeat you. We got a corrupt campaign finance system influencing both political parties. So the average American says, yeah, I got one vote. And Musk can spend hundreds of millions of dollars. Is that a democracy? Why should I vote?
He's right. And what he's saying is not hypothetical. A 2014 Princeton University study conducted by Drs. Gillens and Page found that citizens have a statistically insignificant impact on policy outcomes, whereas interest groups and economic elites, they get the policies that they want passed. Why? Well, because they have capital as well as lobbying power, and you don't. Money in politics is the lowest common denominator, and the feasibility of any particular policy hinges on whether or not there's moneyed interests against it. I mean, you want the minimum wage increased? Too bad, because corporations with lobbying power don't. You want to stop sending weapons to genocidal countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia? Sorry, the victims of genocide in Palestine and Yemen don't have the money to lobby politicians or contribute to their campaigns, not to mention the defense industry wants to keep that money flowing to these genocidal countries. You want your student debt canceled? Not going to happen, because the companies who make billions of dollars servicing your loans every single year profit off of keeping you in debt forever. Nothing ever changes because of money in politics. You can propose the most common sense, efficient, life-saving, cost-cutting policy imaginable, like Medicare for all, for example. But since the private insurance industry profits off of our pain and suffering, we can't have Medicare for all. So we leave our broken healthcare system in place, and leave it broken on purpose, to be clear, just so the health insurance industry can continue to exist and leech off of us. Now, Bernie Sanders explained this in that same town hall.
Raise your hand if you think the American healthcare system is broken. Raise your hand.
Majority, everyone.
Not a majority, virtually everybody in the room.
I can see behind that guy. But.
And that is, all right, question again. How many nations, wealthy nations in the world, do not guarantee health care to all people as a human right? Anybody know the answer? Which country? All right. Now, you're not going to hear much about that on corporate television. You're not going to hear much about that in the United States Congress. We're the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people. 85 million of us are uninsured or underinsured. 60,000 die each year because we can't get to a doctor on time. That's the bad news. You know what the good news is? The insurance companies are making tens of billions of dollars every year denying you coverage. The drug companies charge us the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. So how does it happen that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we're spending twice as much per capita as the people in other countries, and yet we have one of the worst outcomes, healthcare outcomes, of any country on earth? And it gets back to money in politics and the domination of big money, in this case insurance companies, drug companies, over the Republican and Democratic.
I want to try to get some more of our audience questions. Joel,
no, I know you do, but I want to talk about...
I know.
No, I want to, sometimes these issues about health care, about income and wealth inequality are not talked about in the corporate media, and it's time that we did talk about them. That's why the question a moment ago, why are people losing faith in the American system? We don't talk about it on CNN. We don't talk about it in Congress. It's because they understand that a handful of billionaires exert enormous influence, and that has got to change.
And to his point, why doesn't CNN or even MSNBC talk about our corrupt healthcare system more often? Again, you have to follow the money. News outlets are businesses, and their goal of maximizing profits is their main goal. Informing people is secondary. So they have an incentive to not talk about policies that would piss off their potential advertisers. If they bring up Medicare for all, that would turn off potential advertisers in the health insurance industry. Democrats also don't really want to talk about things that would piss off potential donors like Medicare for all, because the health insurance companies that donated to their campaigns the last time might not pick up the phones if they start making these fundraising calls that they always make, if that Democrat is talking about a policy that threatens the health insurance industry's existence, literally. Not to mention, so many politicians are pretty active traders themselves, so they're cognizant of the fact that their stock portfolios would take a major hit if the entire health insurance industry vanished like this because of Medicare for all. And it's gotten so fucking bad that Democrats don't even really talk that much about Citizens United and overturning it, and they've moved the goalpost. And they used to talk about how we need to get money out of politics. Now they talk about getting dark money out of politics. In other words, if they talk about getting money out of politics full stop, that might offend potential wealthy donors who would be pretty pissed off if they lost their ability to bribe politicians, hence why the new DNC chair emphasized that they plan on only taking money from the good billionaires. I mean, there's a reason why Hakeem Jeffries' first instinct after the election was to try to mend fences with Silicon Valley oligarchs instead of the young people and people of color that they lost, because after the oligarchs who give them the most money saw how much influence Trump gave to Elon Musk, they wanted to know why Democrats never let them have that much influence either. And this is our system. This is what happens when you effectively legalize bribery and you incentivize bribery. But things have gotten so bad that rich people started to realize that they no longer need to rely on puppets to do their bidding, even though that's easier. If they wanted to, they can just cut out the middlemen and become politicians themselves and fund their own campaigns. That way they can enrich themselves easier and faster. And that's exactly what Donald Trump did. Now, Donald Trump presumably just used tariffs to deliberately crash the stock market to enrich himself and his rich friends. And that in and of itself is like a new level of corruption. Just think about what we witnessed this week. He set a specific date to let everyone know when the tariffs would go into effect, so that way rich people would know when to dump their stocks. Then once the stock market crashed and prices were low, he told everybody to buy. Then he lifted the tariffs, which led to a surge in the price of stocks that they just bought when prices were down. I mean, it's pretty brazen. And Senator Chris Murphy explained how conspicuous the timing of all of this was.
What we know is that about 9:30 today, Trump posts on social media that people should buy. It's a good time to buy. And then 3 hours later, guess what? He announces that there's going to be a 90-day suspension of many of the tariffs. Predictably, the market, which had been crashing, shoots up, and anyone who made investments early today likely made a lot of money. And so the question is, who close to Trump knew that he was going to suspend the tariffs? Which of his Mar-a-Lago friends or his billionaire advisors were able to capitalize on that inside information? Why did Trump send out that post to his supporters earlier in the day? The bottom line is that the chaotic nature of this tariff policy, with Trump's position changing every single hour, gives ample opportunity for any individual who has early access to information about the White House's change in position to make boatloads of money, either by investing at the right time or pulling their money out of the market at the right time.
And this isn't being done behind closed doors. This is happening in the open. He tweeted, "Now is a good time to buy," before he lifted the tariffs. Crazy shit, even for America. Now, look, this could all be coincidental, but the day after this debacle, Trump was bragging about how much money he made for his rich buddies.
This is Charles Schwab. It's not just a company, it's actually an individual. And he made $2.5 billion today, and he made $900 million. That's not bad. He's in financials. I've always been
Fucking shameless. Now, in case you couldn't make out what he was saying, he said that one of them made $2.5 billion and the other made $900 million. Now, Eric Reinhardt asked a really good question on Twitter after this happened. How much wealth was transferred from the retirement accounts of working class people to the pockets of the ultra wealthy by Trump's manipulation of the markets over the last week? 100 billion, 500 billion, more? And soon after, he got his answer because he shared a summary from Bloomberg, which reads, "The world's richest people added more than 300 billion to their combined net worth, the largest one-day gain in the history of the Bloomberg Billionaire Index after Trump pledged to pause tariffs for some countries." In other words, our billionaire president might have just pulled off one of the biggest rug pulls we've ever seen. And back in 2012, Trump talked about how good bad markets were for investors like him.
Find that I do better in bad markets. I buy things in bad markets. And you can't do that in a great economy. You can't buy it. Either you're going to buy it very expensively or not be able to buy it at all. So there's a lot of opportunity, I find, in the bad times.
Yeah, so if you're wondering why it seemed like Donald Trump was intentionally trying to crash the economy, there's your answer. And he wasn't the only one to presumably profit off of your pain and suffering, because lawmakers like Marjorie Taylor Greene slammed the so-called panicans who were freaking out about tariffs, and she bought the dip. Specifically, she spent around $275,000 when the prices were low. And Adam Schiff announced plans to investigate politicians who may have partook in insider trading, and he's also calling for an investigation into whether or not Trump himself engaged in insider trading or market manipulation. And you can't say for sure until you do an investigation, because this could just be the biggest coincidence in the history of coincidences. But with that being said, where there's smoke, there's probably fire, and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez made it clear that we've seen enough to deduce that the probability that this was all just one big giant fucking coincidence is pretty low.
Trump seems to be doing, from tweeting people to buy stock and then later announcing his development on taxes. If people are pissed about insider trading here at the House, look at what's happening at the White House right now and with the Republican Party.
Do you think he knew what he was doing when he sent out that message about stocks before he made the announcement?
It sure seemed like he did. I don't think that it was a coincidence. I don't think that Trump just coincidentally said buy stocks and then shortly later made an announcement that dramatically inflated and dramatically raised a lot of these asset prices. And, I've heard murmurings on the floor that there may have been people that knew that this was coming. And I'm very interested in seeing some of the stock disclosures that come out when those reports are due. And I'm very interested in what members of Congress have been buying and trading stocks in the last 24 hours prior to this tariff announcement.
I'm very interested in seeing those disclosures too. The deadline is May 15th, apparently. So if some of the most active traders during that time were Trump loyalists, I would love to see what their stock portfolios look like before and after the tariffs. I'm assuming it's going to be pretty interesting. But think about the level of corruption we're talking about here. Our billionaire president might have engaged in purposeful market manipulation to benefit himself, his rich buddies, and his allies in Congress, who are somehow allowed to trade stocks, even though they have insider information which gives them an unfair advantage compared to the rest of us. I mean, the fact that this isn't illegal is mind-boggling to me. Warren Buffett famously said that you're not going to beat the market, but somehow members of Congress, coincidentally, I'm assuming, or maybe just through pure skill, like Nancy Pelosi, consistently beat the fucking market. Although, to be fair, with regard to Nancy Pelosi, she's not doing too good this year, but I'm sure she'll rebound soon. But I mean, the fact that this unethical behavior is done in front of our faces and they don't even try to hide it shows you how far we've fallen, how normalized corruption has become. And what's crazy about the Trump tariff situation is that nobody at all would be surprised if Trump did actually engage in market manipulation. And to get back to Bernie Sanders, he touched on that at that same town hall.
I don't know for a fact, but would I be surprised if there were people who hours before knew exactly what Trump was going to do in rescinding his tariff proposals, understanding that the stock market would soar and you make huge amounts of money? Would I be shocked if we learned about that in the days to come? No, I would not.
Does that announcement that he gave cover to anybody who did buy stocks?
Well, what it does do, look, if you know 2 hours earlier that the stock market's going to go, what are you going to do? You're going to buy a hell of a lot of stock. You can invest in the stock market. But it's not only that. I mean, you got a president of the United States who is now working to give government cover to crypto, and whose family is involved in crypto, makes money by selling coins, crypto coins. Anybody can contribute, which is a direct line to the president.
And crypto is another layer of corruption that we haven't even touched on yet. As Senator Chris Murphy pointed out, today is the 80th day that the U.S. president is running a backdoor bribery scheme in which any CEO or foreign oligarch can send him money secretly through his crypto coin scam in exchange for favors. It's the biggest scandal in the history of the presidency. Nevertheless, it continues to happen. And hypothetically, if Trump was investigated for insider trading and there was concrete evidence that he did engage in market manipulation for self-serving reasons, what do you think would happen? I think we all know that the answer is nothing. He got away with inciting an insurrection and became president after he was convicted of 34 felonies. So I don't think he's sweating whether or not he'll be in trouble for wheeling and dealing with regard to the stock market and, helping his allies get richer. But to take it back to Bernie's original point about why Americans have lost faith in America, I mean, this is why. We all understand why. We haven't just institutionalized corruption by effectively legalizing bribes. We've chosen to let overt corruption and insider trading go unpunished to the point where it's become the norm, not some exception. Everybody's doing it, basically, except for a few exceptions. It's gotten so bad that our billionaire president is literally doing ad reads on the White House lawn to boost sales for a car company owned by his biggest donor, who's also a billionaire. I mean, our government has been completely taken over by oligarchs whose sole purpose is to make the rich richer at everyone else's expense. And it might feel like the system is broken, but unfortunately, it's not broken. In fact, it's working exactly as it was intended to work. This is capitalism. Capitalism is like a democracy-eating virus. And throughout our country's history, we've always tried to find the right balance between capitalism and democracy, but we've never been able to get it right, and we never will, because capitalism and democracy can't exist simultaneously, because the entire point of capitalism is the continuous maximization of profits. So if your entire economic system is premised on that singular goal and institutions are built to incentivize that perverse priority over everything else, the well-being of humanity expectedly is going to take a backseat. It's a system that can't be reformed, literally, because no matter how many reforms that you implement or try to implement, the threat to undo said reforms will always remain so long as capitalism remains intact. So any democratic reforms you manage to actually pass are always going to be temporary. I mean, look at the New Deal. It took less than a century to basically overturn all of the New Deal. And think about why it always ends this way. Why don't these pro-democratic reforms that rein in capitalism last? Well, eventually, capitalists run out of ways to grow profits year after year by simply offering a product or service to people. So they've got to get political to keep maximizing profits even further after they cap out in whatever market they've already dominated. I mean, think it through. Once you've gotten as big as you possibly can in one particular sector, well, to grow even bigger, the next step is to swallow up your competition. Make sure you can exploit your customers by becoming a monopoly, maximize profits further, and of course, you've got to grease the wheels of government to make sure that your company isn't broken up with antitrust laws. And while you're at it, you also have to lobby against worker rights and regulations to cut costs, and you pay politicians to rig the tax code in your favor so you save even more money. You then expand to different sectors and create new industries out of things that were once public services. I mean, think about it. Who needs NASA when you've got SpaceX? Who needs public schools when we can have school vouchers offered by these corporations? But I mean, the asks become bigger over time, and eventually you've got to start upping the cost of your campaign contributions to politicians so that way they'll keep doing your bidding. But that requires different reforms to undo the minimal amount of laws that kind of mitigated the amount of influence that large multinational corporations and rich people can have over our government. So then you've got to start funding legal organizations who do the groundwork to overturn those regulations, overturn campaign finance laws, so that way you can offer bigger bribes to politicians to get better results. And eventually, you become so powerful that you can just pay lobbyists to write legislation for you that the politicians you've already bribed will happily introduce. And oftentimes, they get passed as is. And since there's no prohibitions on politicians becoming lobbyists after they get out of office, since you've lobbied against those prohibitions as well, you can reward them with lucrative jobs if they serve you well enough in Congress. I mean, remember Kyrsten Sinema? She brazenly did the bidding of private equity as a senator, and guess what her new job is? She just landed a gig at Hogan Lovells, a lobbying firm representing clients in AI, crypto, and you guessed it, private equity. See what I mean? This is an outcome that is always inevitable in capitalism. This is what late-stage capitalism in particular looks like. You know, moneyed interests have pit us against each other, hollowed out our democracy, robbed us of public services, and they're trying to find even more ways to profit off of our pain and suffering that they caused. It's why people have lost faith in the system, because it isn't capable of producing results for them. It's why we're trapped in this death spiral where we oscillate between GOP destruction and then Dem disappointment, because both parties have been thoroughly captured by capital. And you can impose some regulations here and there in theory to mitigate the worst effects of capitalism, but does anyone expect corrupt politicians to drastically change a system that they benefit from? Does anyone expect politicians who are corrupt to pass laws that'll rein in their own corruption? Of course not. So even though a lot of people aren't going to want to hear this, the same system that got us into this mess is not going to be a system that will deliver us from this mess. In other words, if we don't kill capitalism, capitalism is going to kill us, literally. And I say that because capitalists have ravaged our entire planet, and our species is now at risk of extinction in service of short-term profits for multinational corporations. So the system doesn't need to be salvaged. And I hope that people understand that. It needs to be done away with for a better system that actually prioritizes the well-being of people, not profits. And quite frankly, I think that we can do better than capitalism.
Luigi, not happy.